A werewolf shifter romance audiobook written by Rosalind Bortha.
Beth stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Part of her wanted to believe him, to accept that somehow this time was different. But Sarah's journal was still at her feet, full of similar hopes and identical disappointments. "Sarah thought you cared about her too," she said quietly, "right up until the end." "I did care about Sarah, but I didn't love her, not the way—" Jake took a step toward her, then stopped when she flinched back. "Beth, please, you have to believe me." "Do I?" Beth looked around the study, at Ryan's satisfied expression, at Jake's desperate face, at the photographs of a ritual altar stained with an Omega's blood. "Because from where I'm standing, this looks exactly like history repeating itself. Powerful Alpha claims useful Omega, tries to fix her, and when that fails, sacrifices her for the greater good. That's not what's happening here. Isn't it?" Beth picked up Sarah's journal, flipping to the final entry. "Listen to this. I can feel Jake pulling away, preparing himself for what's to come. He thinks I don't notice the way he looks at me now, like I'm already dead, already gone. Maybe I am. Maybe we both are. But if I can save him, if my death can break this curse and free him to live without this burden, then at least my life will have meant something." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Jake's face had gone pale, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. She knew. Beth continued, her voice gaining strength. "Sarah knew you'd already written her off, already accepted that she was expendable, and she went through with the ritual anyway because she loved you more than she loved herself. Beth, how long before you start looking at me the same way? How long before my usefulness expires and you decide that my sacrifice is acceptable collateral damage?" "Never." Jake's voice broke on the word. "I swear to you that will never happen." Ryan snorted. He said the same thing to Sarah, right up until he handed her over to the curse casters. Beth looked between them, seeing the truth written in the guilt on Jake's face and the vindicated anger in Ryan's eyes. The man she was falling for had already walked this path once before, had already made the choice to let love become sacrifice. "I need to see," she said quietly. Jake frowned. "See what?" "Sarah's final memories. The ritual. I need to know what really happened that night." "Beth, no. Those memories, they'll destroy you. They're the only way I'll know for certain whether you're telling the truth." Beth moved toward the desk, where Sarah's belongings were still scattered. The moment her skin made contact with the fabric, the world exploded into agonizing clarity. She was Sarah, standing in the center of a ritual circle while robed figures chanted in languages that predated human civilization. The altar behind her pulsed with malevolent energy, hungry for the sacrifice it was about to receive. But Jake was there too, chained to a stone pillar at the edge of the circle, his face streaked with tears as he fought uselessly against bonds that had been designed to hold an alpha king. "Let her go," he screamed, his voice raw with desperation. "Take me instead. Take my life, not hers." The lead curse caster laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your death would accomplish nothing, Alpha King. The curse requires a willing sacrifice from one whose psychic abilities can contain it. Your mate has agreed to pay the price." "Sarah, please," Jake begged, his eyes finding hers across the circle. "Don't do this. We'll find another way." But Sarah was already beyond his reach, her consciousness merging with the dark magic swirling around the altar. "I love you," she whispered, the words carrying across the clearing like a prayer. "Remember me." The curse caster raised the ritual blade, and Sarah closed her eyes, ready to die for the man she loved. But at the last second, something went wrong. The blade descended, but instead of ending Sarah's life quickly, the magic twisted, feeding on her pain and terror instead of her willing sacrifice. She screamed as the curse began tearing her apart from the inside, her psychic abilities turning against her like acid in her veins. "Stop!" Jake's voice cracked with horror. "She's suffering! End it quickly!" "Suffering makes the sacrifice more potent," the curse caster replied coldly. "Her agony will fuel the transfer for decades." Sarah's final moments were an eternity of torment, her consciousness shredded by magic that cared nothing for her humanity. And through it all, Jakes fought his bonds until his wrists were bloody, screaming her name until his voice gave out. Beth jerked back to the present with a sob that tore from her throat like a wounded animal's cry. The journal fell from her hands as she staggered backward, overwhelmed by the horror of what she'd witnessed. Jake was beside her in an instant, his arms coming around her shaking form. "Beth, I'm sorry. I should never have let you see that." "You tried to save her," Beth whispered against his chest. "You tried to stop it." "Not hard enough. I should have found a way to break those chains, should have gotten to her before." "There was no way." Beth pulled back to look at his face, seeing the guilt and grief etched in every line. "Jake, you were bound by magic specifically designed to hold you. There was nothing you could have done. I let her walk into that clearing knowing it was dangerous. Because she chose to walk into it. Because she made the decision to try to save you, even knowing the risks. Sarah's death wasn't your fault. It was the curse casters who tortured her, who turned her willing sacrifice into something monstrous." Jake closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "The guilt has been eating me alive for 2 years. Ryan was right about one thing. I did fail her. I should have found another way." "And now you have." Beth's voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "My abilities are stronger than Sarah's were. If anyone can break this curse without dying in the process, it's me." Jake's eyes snapped open. "No, absolutely not. I won't lose you the way I lost her." "You won't lose me because I'm not her. I'm stronger, Jake, strong enough to survive what killed Sarah. But more than that, I'm choosing this with full knowledge of the risks. Sarah went into that ritual hoping for the best. I'm going in prepared for the worst. Beth, I love you too," she whispered, the words she'd been holding back finally spilling free. "I love you, and that means I won't watch you die slowly from this curse when I have the power to stop it." Jake's answering kiss was desperate, full of love and fear, and the terrible knowledge that loving someone sometimes meant letting them risk everything. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "We'll find another way," Jake said firmly. "There has to be another way." But even as he spoke the words, Beth could see the resignation in his eyes. The curse was accelerating, spreading through his pack, destroying lives with every day they delayed, and she was the only one with the power to stop it. Ryan had been watching their exchange with an unreadable expression. Now he stepped forward, his earlier rage replaced with something that looked almost like respect. "You really do love her," he said to Jake, wonder in his voice. "More than my own life." Ryan nodded slowly. "Then maybe this time will be different. Maybe love will be enough to break the pattern." Beth looked between them, seeing the fragile hope taking root despite everything they'd been through. "It will be," she said with quiet conviction, "because this time I'm not going in alone. This time we're going to rewrite the rules." And as Jake's arms tightened around her, as Ryan offered his grudging support, Beth felt something she'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the right people to face whatever darkness lay ahead, even if that darkness demanded everything she had to give.
Beth felt the attack like a lightning strike to her consciousness, a sudden, vicious intrusion that tore through her mental defenses while she was deep in Jake's memories. One moment she was carefully examining his childhood recollections for traces of curse magic, and the next she was drowning in malevolent darkness that tasted of grave dirt and centuries-old hatred. "Found you," a voice whispered across the psychic plane, cold as winter wind. "The little memory thief who thinks she can undo our greatest work." Jake's mindscape, usually a landscape of rolling hills and ancient forests that reflected his inner peace, convulsed around them. The sky turned the color of old blood, and shadows began pouring from every tree, every stone, every hidden place where nightmares lived. "Beth!" Jake's mental voice reached her through the chaos, tinged with panic. "Something's wrong. I can feel them in my head." She could see him in the distance, his form flickering between solid and translucent as the attack destabilized their connection. But worse than that, she could see them, the dark practitioners, their astral forms wreathed in shadow as they swarmed toward Jake's consciousness like vultures descending on carrion. "They're trying to steal your memories," Beth realized, her own mental voice sharp with alarm. "All of them. Everything that makes you who you are." The lead practitioner turned its attention toward her, and Beth felt the full weight of its ancient malice. "You understand correctly, child. The Alpha King's mind contains centuries of territorial magic, pack bonds, the very foundation of his people's power. Once we harvest those memories, his kingdom will fall to us like ripe fruit." Beth felt Jake's terror as the shadows closed around him, their touch like acid against his consciousness. Every memory they contacted began to dissolve. His first successful hunt, his coronation ceremony, the face of his first friend. Piece by piece, they were erasing him. "No!" The word erupted from Beth with enough psychic force to shatter the nearest shadow creature. "You will not have him." Her power, which had spent years hiding behind careful walls and fearful restraint, finally broke free. It poured out of her like molten gold, burning away the darkness that threatened to consume Jake's mind. For the first time in her life, Beth didn't fight her abilities. She embraced them, wielded them like the weapon they'd always been meant to be. The dark practitioners recoiled from her fury, their forms wavering as her power washed over them. "Impossible," one hissed. "You're just an Omega. You cannot—" "I am Beth Morrison. I am the Alpha King's mate, and you have made a grave mistake threatening what belongs to me." But even as she fought, she could feel the toll the battle was taking on their physical bodies. In the real world, they were sitting defenseless in Jake's study, their minds locked in psychic combat while their bodies grew cold and still. If the dark practitioners had allies in the physical realm, as if summoned by her fear, she felt a tremor through their bond that had nothing to do with the mental battle. Someone was in the room with their vulnerable forms. Someone with hostile intent. "Ryan," she called out through their pack connection, hoping desperately that his earlier show of support had been genuine. "We need help. Physical threat." The response came immediately, Ryan's mental voice sharp with battle readiness. "I'm here. 3 cult members just broke through the window. Jake's bleeding. They cut him to try to shock you out of the memory dive." Beth felt Jake's physical pain echo through their connection, but she couldn't afford to be distracted. The dark practitioners were regrouping, their forms coalescing into something larger and more parable than their individual selves. "You care for him," the lead entity observed with cruel amusement. "Feel his blood flowing, memory thief. Know that while you waste time fighting us in his mind, his body dies in the physical world. Choose. Save his memories or save his life. You cannot do both." The ultimatum was designed to paralyze her with indecision, but instead it crystallized her resolve. She'd spent her entire life believing she was too dangerous, too broken, too wrong to protect anyone. But Jake had shown her a different truth, that her power could be used to save rather than harm. "Watch me," she whispered. Beth split her consciousness, something she had never attempted before. Part of her remained in Jake's mindscape, continuing to battle the shadow entities, while another part reached back toward the physical realm. She felt the cult members in Jake's study, their minds open and vulnerable in their focus on causing physical harm. Without hesitation, she struck. The first attacker's memories simply vanished. 20 years of magical training, knowledge of spells and rituals, even his own name. He stood frozen in confusion as his identity disappeared. The knife fell from nerveless fingers. The second managed to block her initial assault. his own psychic defenses flaring to life. But Beth had been holding back her entire life, and now she was done with restraint. She tore through his mental barriers like tissue paper, stealing not just memories, but the very capacity to form new ones. He would live, but he would never again be able to learn, to grow, to become more than what he was in this moment. The third cult member broke and ran, abandoning his mission in the face of power he'd never imagined an Omega could possess. Impressive, the lead shadow entity admitted, its tone now tinged with wariness. But you cannot maintain this level of effort indefinitely. Already we feel your strength wavering. It was true. Splitting her consciousness and fighting on multiple fronts was draining Beth faster than she'd anticipated, but she'd bought them time, and Ryan was already moving to secure Jake's physical form. His pulse is steadying. Ryan's voice reached her from the physical realm. Whatever you did to those cult bastards, it worked. But Beth, you need to end this soon. Jake's body can't take much more strain. Beth turned her attention back to Jake's mindscape, where the Alpha King's consciousness had stabilized now that the immediate physical threat was over. But the dark practitioners were still there, their forms writhing with frustrated hunger. "Jake," she called to him across the mental landscape, "I need you to trust me completely. No barriers, no holding back. Let me into the deepest parts of your mind." Jake's astral form solidified, his expression resolute despite the circumstances. "What are you planning?" "Something that's either going to save us both or destroy us trying." Beth reached for his hand, their mental touch sending sparks of connection through the mindscape. "The curse isn't just stealing your memories, it's using them as an anchor point to drain your pack's territorial magic. If I can trace that connection back to its source..." "You'll be walking directly into their strongest magical working," said Jake grimly. "The curse has been building power for 3 centuries. It could consume you entirely. Or I could consume it." Beth's smile was sharp with dangerous possibility. "My power has been growing since I arrived here, Jake, growing beyond anything I thought possible. What if that's not accidental? What if the curse has been feeding me power in preparation for this moment?" The dark practitioners stirred at her words, their forms becoming more agitated. "No," the lead entities snarled. "She cannot be allowed to." But Beth was already moving, her consciousness diving deep into the connection between Jake's mind and the ancient curse. She felt the magical pathways like burning threads, centuries of accumulated power flowing through psychic channels that had been built with Sarah's Beth. And there, at the heart of it all, she found the source. The curse wasn't just a spell. It was a living entity, fed by stolen memories and sustained by the suffering of Jake's bloodline. It pulsed with malevolent intelligence, aware of her presence and eager to add her consciousness to its collection. "Come, child," it whispered, its voice like honey over poison. "Join with us willingly, and your mate's suffering can end. Fight us, and we will make his final memories ones of watching you die." Beth felt Jake's presence beside her, his consciousness blazing with protective fury. "Whatever you're going to do it now. I can feel them preparing something." She could feel it too, a massive surge of dark magic building in the practitioners' astral forms. They were preparing to tear Jake's mind apart rather than risk losing their prize to Beth's interference. There was no more time for planning or hesitation. Beth opened herself completely, dropping every barrier she'd ever built around her power. Her consciousness expanded until she could feel every memory in Jake's mind, every thought and dream and fear that made him who he was. And then she went further, reaching through their mate bond to touch the memories of every wolf in their pack. Hundreds of minds suddenly connected to hers, their combined psychic energy flowing through her like wildfire. She was the Alpha King's mate, and through that bond, she had access to the collective consciousness of their entire territory. "Now you begin to understand," the curse entity purred, its attention focusing entirely on her. "The true scope of what we can achieve together. All those minds, all that power flowing through a single conduit. You could reshape reality itself." "You're right," Beth said quietly. "I could." And then she began to devour it.
The curse had spent centuries feeding on stolen memories, but Beth was something it had never encountered before. A consciousness capable of stealing not just thoughts, but the very essence of what it was. She felt the entity's shock as her power wrapped around it like a python, squeezing tighter with each passing second. Impossible! You are merely Omega, merely... I am the memory thief, and you have something that belongs to me. She began to pull, drawing the stolen memories out of the cursed entity and back into their rightful owners. 3 centuries of accumulated power flowed through her consciousness like a river of liquid fire, threatening to burn her away entirely. But she held on, anchored by Jake's love and the faith of a pack that had accepted her as their queen. The dark practitioners screamed as their greatest working began to unravel, their astral forms dissolving as the power that sustained them was ripped away. One by one, they faded from Jake's mindscape, their centuries of accumulated knowledge becoming part of Beth's ever-expanding awareness. But the curse entity itself was fighting back, trying to drag her consciousness into the void with it. Beth felt her sense of self beginning to fray at the edges, her individual identity threatening to dissolve into the ocean of memories she was processing. Beth. Jake's mental voice cut through the chaos like a lifeline. Come back to me. Don't let it take you. She felt his love like an anchor, a fixed point of identity that kept her from losing herself in the stolen memories. And suddenly she understood. This was what Sarah had lacked. Not power, not skill, but someone willing to fight for her sanity when the magic threatened to consume her entirely. I'm here, Beth whispered, her consciousness snapping back to focus on Jake's beloved presence. I'm not going anywhere. Together, they delivered the killing blow to the cursed entity, their combined will crushing the ancient evil that had plagued Jake's bloodline for generations. Beth felt it die with a psychic shriek that echoed across multiple dimensions, its stolen power dissipating like smoke in the wind. The mindscape around them began to stabilize, returning to the peaceful forests and rolling hills that reflected Jake's true nature. But Beth could feel the changes in herself, the absorbed memories of centuries, the accumulated knowledge of the dark practitioners, the sheer scope of power that now flowed through her consciousness. Is it over? Jake asked, his astral form solidifying as their connection stabilized. The curse is broken, Beth confirmed, though she could hear the exhaustion in her own mental voice. But Jake, I'm not the same. All those memories, all that power, I don't know how to process it all. Then we'll figure it out together, Jake said simply, his love burning bright enough to illuminate every corner of his mindscape. Whatever you've become, whatever you need to learn to control, we'll face it as partners. Beth felt tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face, though whether they belonged to her physical body or her astral form, she couldn't tell. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. Now come back to me. Come back to the physical world so I can hold you. The return to physical consciousness was jarring, like diving into ice water after basking in warm sunlight. Beth gasped as her awareness crashed back into her body, every nerve ending screaming with the aftershocks of psychic battle. She was still sitting in Jake's study, her hand clasped in his, but everything had changed. The very air seemed different, charged with possibilities that hadn't existed before. And when she looked at Jake, really looked at him, she could see the change in his eyes. The curse fog that had clouded them was gone, replaced with crystal clear awareness. How do you feel? She asked, her voice rough from the strain of the battle. Jake flexed his fingers experimentally, his expression of wonder. Like myself. For the first time in years, I feel completely like myself. He turned to look at her, and the love in his gaze made her breath catch. Beth, what you did, how you fought for me, for all of us. She saved the entire pack, Ryan said from across the room, his voice filled with awe and gratitude. I felt it through the pack bonds. Every wolf in our territory just had their stolen memories returned. The confusion, the fear, all of it just lifted. Beth tried to smile,
but the effort felt enormous. The psychic battle had drained her more completely than she had realized, and the absorbed memories were still swirling through her consciousness like a hurricane of foreign thoughts and experiences. "Rest," Jake said gently, pulling her against his chest. "You've done enough for one day." "The cult members?" Beth asked, fighting to stay conscious. "Dealt with," Ryan assured her. "And Beth, thank you. For saving him. For saving all of us." Beth managed to nod before exhaustion finally claimed her, pulling her into the deepest sleep of her life. But even as she surrendered to unconsciousness, she could feel Jake's presence wrapped around her like a protective shield, his love a constant warmth that promised she would never have to fight her battles alone. The curse was broken. The pack was safe, and for the first time in her life, Beth Morrison knew exactly who she was meant to be. She was the memory thief, the Alpha King's mate, the woman who had looked into the darkness and emerged victorious, and she was home.
Beth woke to the sound of her own screaming. She bolted upright in the tangled sheets, her heart hammering as fragments of 100 different dreams. Not dreams, she realized with growing horror, but memories that didn't belong to her, scattered through her consciousness like broken glass. The faces of strangers flickered behind her eyelids, a cult member's first kill, a dark practitioner's childhood trauma, centuries of stolen experiences that had nowhere to go now that their original hosts were dead. "Beth." Jake's voice cut through the chaos, steady and calm despite the panic she could feel radiating from him through their bond. "You're safe. You're in our room. It was just a nightmare." "Not a nightmare," Beth whispered, pressing her palms against her temples as another wave of foreign memories crashed over her. "They're still in here, Jake. All the memories I absorbed during the battle, they're mixing with mine. I can't tell what's real anymore." She could see the worry in Jake's dark eyes as he reached for her, then hesitated. Ever since the psychic battle 3 days ago, casual touch had become complicated. Beth's power, supercharged by the absorbed memories of centuries, was no longer fully under her control. The slightest skin contact could trigger an involuntary transfer of thoughts, and twice now she'd accidentally stolen memories from pack members who'd only been trying to help. "Tell me what you're seeing," Jek said gently, settling on the edge of the bed without touching her. "Everything." Beth's voice cracked with exhaustion. "I know things I shouldn't know, remember places I've never been. There's a farmhouse in Scotland where a practitioner murdered his family 200 years ago, and I can still smell the blood on the walls. I remember performing rituals that required human sacrifice, and part of me, God help me, part of me remembers enjoying it." Jake's expression darkened with understanding. "The curse entity's memories, they're contaminating your consciousness." More than that, Beth climbed out of bed, pacing to the window where dawnlight was just beginning to touch the mountains. "My power isn't just stronger, it's different. Yesterday when Commander Elena was briefing me on pack security, I didn't just read her thoughts, I changed them. Accidentally edited her memory of the conversation to include details that never happened." The admission hung between them like a physical weight. Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "Did you tell Elena what happened?" "How could I?" Beth wrapped her arms around herself, trying to contain the wild energy that seemed to crackle just beneath her skin. "She doesn't even know her memory was altered. For all I know, I've been unconsciously changing everyone's thoughts since I woke up. The pack members who've been visiting to thank me for breaking the curse, what if their gratitude isn't even real? What if I planted those feelings to make myself feel better?" "Beth, stop." Jake stood, moving closer but still maintaining careful distance. "You're spiraling. Your power is stronger, yes, but you're not some monster who's been manipulating everyone without realizing it." "How can you be sure?" Beth turned from the window and Jake could see the fear that had been eating at her for days. "How can anyone be sure of anything when I might be unconsciously rewriting reality to suit my preferences?" Before Jake could respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus's voice called through the wood, tight with urgency. "Your Majesty, we need you both in the council chamber immediately. There's been..."
An incident. Beth felt her stomach drop as they hurried through the corridors toward the council chamber. Pack members they passed gave her a wide berth, some openly staring with expressions that ranged from wariness to outright fear. The grateful smiles she'd grown accustomed to over the past few days were nowhere to be seen. The council chamber was packed with representatives from every major pack family, their faces grim with shared purpose. Ryan stood at the center of the room, his expression carefully neutral as he watched Beth and Jake enter. "What's this about?" Jake demanded, his alpha authority filling the space. Elder Morrison, no relation to Beth despite the shared surname, stepped forward with the weight of his 70 years lending gravity to his words. "It's about your mate, Your Majesty. About what she's become since the battle." Beth felt Jake tense beside her, his protective instincts flaring to life. "Be very careful with your next words, Elder." Thomas Martinez, age 28, father of 3. Yesterday he spoke with the Queen about patrol schedules for the eastern border. This morning he woke up believing he'd never had children. His wife, his cubs, he looks at them like strangers. The memories of their entire relationship have been erased from his mind.
Beth felt the blood drain from her face. She remembered the conversation with Thomas, remembered the way he'd seemed nervous around her, the brief moment when their hand had touched as he'd passed her a map. "That's not," she started, then stopped. Because it was possible. More than possible. It was exactly the kind of accident she'd been terrifying herself with since waking up. Sarah Chen, another council member, spoke up. She thanked the Queen for saving her son's memories during the plague. Now she's convinced her son died 5 years ago in hunting accident. She's been mourning him while he stands right in front of her, trying to convince her he's alive. More cases followed, each one a fresh knife to Beth's heart. Pack members whose memories had been altered, sometimes subtly, sometimes catastrophically. The evidence was damning, and Beth couldn't deny it, because she couldn't remember what she might have done unconsciously. "Enough," Jake said, his voice cutting through the litany of accusations. These could be after effects of the curse breaking. The entire pack's memories were disrupted during the battle. The disruption followed specific patterns. Marcus interrupted quietly, his voice heavy with reluctant certainty. Each incident occurred after direct contact with Beth. The affected memories all relate to emotional content, love, family bonds, personal attachments. It's as if her power is unconsciously targeting the things that matter most to people. Beth sank into a chair as the weight of what she'd done, what she might be continuing to do, crashed over her. "How many?" she whispered. 17 confirmed cases. Probably more who haven't realized their memories have been altered yet. "We're not here to condemn you," Elder Morrison said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We understand that you saved us all by breaking the curse. But Your Majesty, the risk of keeping someone with uncontrolled power among the pack? You want me to exile her?" Jake's voice was deadly quiet. "We want her to leave voluntarily, for everyone's safety, including her own. There are isolated territories where she could learn to control her abilities without endangering innocent people." Beth felt Jake's rage building through their bond, but beneath it was something that made her chest tight with grief, the terrible acknowledgement that the council might be right. "No," Jake said flatly. "I won't send Beth away. She's my mate, my queen, and she just saved all of your lives. We'll find another way to manage her abilities." "But what if there isn't another way?" Beth asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the council's murmurs. "What if this is who I am now? Someone who destroys the things that matter most without even realizing it?" Jake turned to face her, his expression fierce with determination. "Then we figure out how to live with it. Together." "Jake..." "No." He moved to stand behind her chair, his hands hovering just above her shoulders,
without quite making contact. "I won't lose you to fear, Beth. Not yours, and certainly not theirs." The council erupted in protests, voices raised in anger and concern, but Jake's alpha command silenced them with brutal efficiency. "This meeting is over. Beth stays. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." The dismissal was clear, but Elder Morrison remained standing. "Your Majesty, with respect, your judgment may be compromised by your emotional attachment. The Queen's power is affecting everyone around her, possibly including you. How can we be certain that your feelings for her are even real?" The question hit like a physical blow, and Beth felt Jake's shock echo through their bond. It was the one possibility neither of them had wanted to consider, that Beth's unconscious power might be influencing Jake's emotions, creating artificial feelings that felt completely genuine. "Get out," Jake said softly, but his words carried enough menace to make hardened warriors step back. "All of you, now." The council filed out in tense silence, leaving Beth and Jake alone with the terrible weight of unspoken possibilities. "Jake," Beth said carefully, "what if they're right? What if what you feel for me isn't real?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some point beyond her shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. "Do you know what my first memory of you is?" Beth frowned. "The claiming ceremony?" "Before that. I was watching the ceremony from the forest edge, deciding which Omega to claim for her abilities. I saw you standing in the shadows, trying to make yourself invisible, and I felt something. Before I knew about your power, before I understood what you could do for me. Just a woman who looked like she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders." Jake moved around to face her, still maintaining careful distance. "If you were unconsciously influencing my emotions, wouldn't you have made yourself irresistible from the beginning? Wouldn't you have ensured that I claimed you out of desire rather than necessity? Maybe I wasn't strong enough then. Or maybe," Jake interrupted gently, "what I feel for you has nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the woman who fought a psychic war to save my mind. The woman who's so terrified of hurting people that she'd rather exile herself than risk another accident." Beth wanted to believe him, but doubt was a poison that had already taken root. How can we ever be sure? Instead of answering directly, Jake did something that surprised her. He pulled a knife from his belt and drew it across his palm, letting blood well up in the shallow cut. "Jake, what are you doing?" Proving a point, he held up his bleeding hand. "Touch me." "I can't. If my power activates." "Touch me, Beth. If your abilities are truly out of control, if you're unconsciously manipulating everyone around you, then surely you'll steal this memory the moment we make contact. But if you can choose not to, if you have more control than you think." Beth stared at his outstretched hand, her heart hammering with fear and desperate hope. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and placed her fingertips against his bloodied palm. The contact sent electricity racing up her arm, but nothing else happened. No flood of unwanted memories, no accidental theft of his thoughts, just the warm pressure of skin against skin and the overwhelming love flowing through their mate bond. "Your power responds to emotion," Jake said quietly. "Fear, stress, strong feelings. That's when it becomes unpredictable. But when you're calm, centered, in control of yourself..." He turned his hand to intertwine their fingers. "You're the strongest person I know, Beth. Strong enough to master this. What about the pack members whose memories I've altered? How do I fix what I've already broken?" "We'll figure it out. Marcus has been researching memory restoration techniques. Some of the damage might be reversible." Jake's grip on her hand tightened. "But even if it's not, even if this is the price we pay for breaking the curse, I won't let you carry that guilt alone." Beth felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the crushing weight of isolation began to lift. "The council will never accept me staying. They're terrified of what I might do." "Then we prove them wrong. We show them that you can control this power, that you can use it to help rather than harm." Jake brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. But first we need to practice, in private, where any accidents won't hurt innocent people. Over the following days, they established a routine. Every morning, Jake would meet Beth in a secluded training room deep in the palace's lower levels. There, surrounded by protective wards Marcus had created, Beth could safely explore the limits of her expanded abilities. The work was exhausting and often frustrating. Beth's power had become like a wild river, requiring constant vigilance to keep it flowing in useful directions. But slowly, with Jake's patient guidance, she began to regain control. The training sessions became increasingly intimate as they learned to work together. Jake would share specific memories, allowing Beth to practice accessing them without causing damage. She learned to sift through thoughts with surgical precision, to touch a mind without leaving fingerprints of her presence. And through it all, their connection deepened. Not just the supernatural bond of Alpha and Omega, but something more human and precious. The intimacy of complete trust, of two people who chose to be vulnerable with each other despite the risks. It was during one such session, as Beth practiced restoring a memory Jake had allowed her to temporarily hide, that their careful professional distance finally crumbled. "There," Beth said softly, her consciousness gently returning the memory of Jake's 5th birthday to its proper place in his mind. "How does that feel?" "Perfect," Jake murmured, his mental voice warm with satisfaction. "It's like you were never there." But as Beth began to withdraw from his mind, Jake's consciousness reached for hers, not to share memories, but simply to maintain the connection between them. The psychic intimacy was intoxicating, more personal than any physical touch. "Don't go yet," his mental voice whispered. "Stay with me like this." Beth hesitated, knowing that what he was asking for went far beyond training. To remain connected, consciousness to consciousness, was to be naked in ways that had nothing to do with physical bodies. "Beth," Jake's mental presence wrapped around hers like silk, warm and inviting and completely without pretense. "I love you. Not the idea of you, not what you can do for me, but you. The woman who's so afraid of her own power that she practices alone for hours, trying to perfect control that might never come. The woman who sacrificed her own peace of mind to save people who now fear her." His love was a living thing in the mental space between them, honest and overwhelming and absolutely real. Beth felt it in every fiber of her being, and she knew with complete certainty that no power on earth could manufacture something so genuine. "I love you too," she whispered back, her consciousness intertwining with his until she couldn't tell where her thoughts ended and his began. "I'm terrified that I'll hurt you, that I'll damage something precious without meaning to, but I love you." When they finally returned to physical awareness, they were sitting closer than they'd been when the session started, Jake's hands cupping her face while her fingers gripped the front of his shirt. "No more careful distance," Jake said quietly, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "No more treating each other like we're made of glass. If we're going to face whatever comes next, we do it as partners, as mates, as people who choose to love each other despite the risks." Beth nodded, her heart full to overflowing with relief and desire and the kind of hope she'd never dared to feel before. When she kissed her, it was with months of pent-up longing finally given permission to exist. But even as they lost themselves in each other, even as Beth finally allowed herself to believe that her power could be controlled and her love could be trusted, a darker realization was taking shape in the back of her mind. The curse was broken, yes, but the real work, learning to live with the consequences of that victory, was just beginning. And based on the hatred she'd seen in some pack members' eyes, she wasn't sure they would all survive what came next. The attack came at dawn, when the pack's defenses were at their weakest, and Beth was deep in meditation, trying to repair the memories she'd accidentally damaged. She felt them before she saw them, a creeping wrongness that set her teeth on edge, like the psychic equivalent of nails on chalkboard. Her eyes snapped open just as the first wave of dark energy slammed into the palace's protective wards, shattering them like glass. "Jake!" she screamed, but her voice was lost in the thunder's roar of collapsing stone as the east wing of the palace exploded inward. Through the smoking rubble came figures in black robes, their faces hidden behind masks carved from what looked like human bone. But it wasn't their physical presence that made Beth's blood freeze. It was the yawning void where their memories should have been, the psychic emptiness that spoke of souls long since consumed by dark magic. "We have come for what was promised," a voice whispered directly into her mind, cold and ancient and utterly without mercy. "The royal bloodline's memories belong to us. The territorial bonds will be severed. This pack will fall." Jake burst through their bedroom door, already shifting into his alpha form, his eyes blazing with golden fire. "Beth, get behind me!" "No," she said sharply, rising to her feet as her own power unfurled around her like invisible wings. "This isn't a fight you can win with claws and teeth. They're after your memories, Jake. Everything that makes you who you are. Everything that binds this pack to its territory. They want to steal it all." More explosions echoed through the palace as the dark practitioners blasted through interior walls, moving with supernatural speed toward the royal chambers. Beth could feel their hunger like acid in her mind. Centuries of accumulated greed focused on one goal: to harvest the Alpha King's memories and use them to break the magical bonds that protected the pack's lands. "The territorial magic," Jake breathed, understanding flooding his features. "If they steal my memories of the bonding rituals, the pack loses its protected status. The lands become open territory." Beth grabbed his arm, her mind racing. "Jake, we have to get you out of here. If they capture you, I'm not running from my own palace." "This isn't about pride," Beth's voice cracked with desperation. "If they get your memories, everyone dies. The cubs, the elders, everyone who can't defend themselves." A new voice cut through their argument, cold and familiar. "Your Majesty should have listened to his counsel." They turned to find Elder Morrison standing in the doorway, his face grim with resignation. Behind him stood 3 other council members, their expressions a mixture of fear and determination. "You led them here," Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. "We contacted them weeks ago, after the curse broke and we saw what your mate had become." Morrison's gaze shifted to Beth, and she saw genuine regret in his weathered features. "We never intended for it to go this far. We only wanted them to contain her power, to find a way to make her safe. But they demanded a price we couldn't refuse." "What price?" Beth asked, though she already knew the answer would destroy her. "You," Morrison said simply. "You alive, Beth. Your power enhanced by all those absorbed memories. You're worth more to them than 100 lesser practitioners. In exchange for delivering you, they promised to leave the pack unharmed." Jake's roar of fury shook dust from the ceiling, and Beth felt his rage burning through their bond like wildfire. "You betrayed your own pack. You betrayed your queen." "We tried to save the pack," another council member protested. "She's dangerous, Your Majesty. Even you must see that. 17 people have had their minds altered." "Because I was learning to control my power," Beth said quietly, her heart breaking as the full scope of the betrayal sank in. "Those accidents happened because I was afraid, because I was fighting against my abilities instead of working with them, but you never gave me the chance to prove I could do better." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors, heavy boots and whispered incantations growing closer by the second. Jake positioned himself between Beth and the door, every line of his body screaming protective fury. "It doesn't matter now," Morrison said with bitter finality. "They're here. If you surrender Beth willingly, they'll honor their bargain. If you fight, then I die fighting," Jake snarled. "I won't hand over my mate to save myself." "My lord," Ryan's voice suddenly echoed in Jake's mind, sharp with urgency.
We're holding the main hall, but barely. They've got some kind of memory-draining ritual circle set up in the courtyard. Every time one of our people gets too close, they forget why they're fighting." Beth felt Jake's mental response, felt him preparing to coordinate the palace's defenses, and knew with crystalline clarity that it was hopeless. The dark practitioners had been planning this for months, maybe years. They had allies inside the pack, superior numbers, and centuries of experience with exactly this kind of assault. Unless she did something that would cost her everything. "Jake," she said softly, her hand finding his, "I need you to trust me one more time."
He turned to look at her, and she saw the exact moment when he realized what she was thinking. "No, Beth, no. Whatever you're considering, the only way to break their power permanently is to destroy the source." Beth's voice was steady, despite the terror clawing at her chest. "All those absorbed memories, all the stolen power I've been carrying since the battle, I can turn it back on them, use their own accumulated magic against them, and sacrifice yourself in the process. Maybe," Beth's smile was heartbreaking in its fragile hope, "maybe I'm stronger than they think. Maybe I can survive giving up what doesn't belong to me." Jake's hands framed her face, his touch desperate and tender. "The memories of loving you, those could be taken too. You might forget everything we've built together." "Then you'll have to remind me," Beth whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him with everything she had. "You'll have to help me remember why I chose to save you all." Before Jake could protest further, the door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and dark energy. The lead practitioner stood silhouetted against the smoking doorframe, his bone mask gleaming in the dawn light. "Enough talk," the figure said, his voice like grinding stone. "The Omega comes with us. The Alpha dies. The Pack falls. This ends now." What followed was chaos incarnate. Jake lunged forward in full Alpha fury, his claws extending as he moved to intercept the practitioners. But they weren't interested in a physical fight. Black tendrils of psychic energy lashed out from their hands, seeking to invade his mind and steal his memories by force. Beth threw herself into the mental battlefield without hesitation, her consciousness expanding to shield Jake's thoughts from the probing attacks. The contact was like touching molten metal. The dark practitioner's power was ancient and corrupt, fueled by centuries of stolen lives and broken minds. "You cannot protect him," the lead practitioner's mental voice hissed as his consciousness pressed against hers. "Your power is untrained, chaotic. We have harvested the memories of kings and queens for 1,000 years. "Then you should know," Beth replied, her mental voice growing stronger as she drew on every memory she'd absorbed during the original battle, "that power without love is just destruction waiting to collapse on itself." She could feel Jake fighting beside her, both physically and mentally, his alpha strength holding back 2 practitioners while she dueled with the leader in the space between thoughts. Around them, the bedroom was being torn apart by conflicting energies, furniture exploding, walls cracking, the very air seeming to burn. "Ryan, where are you?" Jake's desperate mental call rang through the palace, seeking his beta's support. The answer came not in words, but in action. The remaining bedroom wall blasted outward as Ryan charged through it in full wolf form, his massive frame slamming into one of the practitioners with bone-crushing force. "My king," Ryan panted as he shifted back to human form, blood streaming from a dozen wounds. "Forgive me. I was wrong about everything." "Fight now, apologize later," Jake snapped, then cried out as psychic claws raked across his consciousness, stealing fragments of childhood memories. Beth felt each stolen memory like a knife to her heart. The practitioners were winning through sheer persistence, slowly eroding Jake's mental defenses while she exhausted herself trying to shield him. Soon they would have enough royal memories to begin the territorial unbinding ritual, unless she made the choice that would save them all and destroy her in the process. "I love you," she whispered into Jake's mind, the words carrying all the tenderness and regret her heart could hold. "Remember that. Whatever happens next, remember that I chose this." Before Jake could respond further, Beth did something that should have been impossible. She opened her consciousness completely, dropping every mental shield and allowing her power to flow outward without restraint. not to attack the practitioners, but to offer herself as bait. "Come and take it," she challenged them, her mental voice ringing with desperate courage. "All of it. Every memory I've absorbed, every fragment of power I've stolen. It's yours if you can claim it." The practitioner's attention snapped to her like iron filings to a magnet. She felt their greed surge, their careful strategy abandoned in favor of the chance to absorb centuries of accumulated memories all at once. They reached for her consciousness with hungry, grasping thoughts, and walked directly into her trap. The moment their minds touched hers, she began to share not just the stolen memories she'd absorbed, but the emotions that came with them. Every death the dark practitioners had caused, every life they had destroyed, every moment of pain and terror they had inflicted on innocents, she forced them to experience it all through the eyes of their victims.
The lead practitioner's scream of psychic agony shattered every piece of glass remaining in the room. His followers writhed on the floor as centuries of suppressed guilt and horror crashed over them in an unstoppable tide. But the effort was destroying Beth from within. She could feel pieces of herself being torn away, memories and experiences dissolving as she poured everything she had into the attack. Her childhood, her training, her first glimpse of Jake at the claiming ceremony, all of it fragmenting as her consciousness unraveled. "Beth, stop!" Jake's mental voice was desperate, reaching for her even as she slipped away. "You're losing yourself." "I know," she replied, her mental voice growing fainter as more of her identity dissolved. "But they'll never hurt anyone again." The practitioners were dying, their corrupted souls unable to process the emotional weight of their crimes. One by one, they collapsed, their bodies becoming empty shells as their consciousness simply ceased to exist. But Beth was dying too, her sense of self scattering like leaves in a hurricane. She could feel Jake trying to anchor her, his love flowing through their bond like a lifeline, but it wasn't enough. She'd given too much, sacrificed too many pieces of herself to save the people she loved. The last thing she remembered, as darkness closed over her consciousness, was Jake's voice calling her name, and the warm press of his lips against hers as he tried desperately to kiss her back to life. Then there was nothing but silence, and the terrible uncertainty of whether love would be enough to bring her home.
Beth woke to the sound of rain against windows she didn't recognize. She lay still for a long moment, staring at the ornate ceiling above her and trying to piece together where she was. The room was beautiful, all dark wood and rich fabrics that spoke of wealth and importance, but it felt foreign to her, like a museum exhibit she was viewing rather than a space where she belonged. Her body ached in ways that suggested recent trauma, and when she tried to access her memories of how she'd gotten here, she found only fragments, flashes of darkness and terror, the sensation of something vital being torn away from her, and through it all, a man's voice calling her name with desperate love. Beth? She turned toward the voice and saw him, tall and dark-haired, with golden eyes that seemed to hold entire worlds of worry and relief. He was handsome in a way that made her pulse quicken, but she couldn't for the life of her remember who he was, or why he was looking at her like she'd just returned from the dead. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice rusty from disuse. Who are you?" The pain that flashed across his features was so raw, it made her chest tight with sympathy. He'd been hoping she would remember him, she realized. Hoping, and probably praying, judging by the exhaustion lines around his eyes. "My name is Jake," he said carefully, settling into the chair beside her bed without taking his eyes off her face. I'm your mate. Your husband in human terms." Mate. The word felt strange on her tongue, though not entirely foreign. Something about it resonated in a place deeper than conscious memory, like an echo of something important she'd lost. "Are you sure?"
Because I don't remember getting married. Jake's smile was heartbreaking in its gentleness. We never had a traditional wedding. The claiming ceremony was complicated. But yes, I'm sure. We're bonded, Beth. Soul deep, the kind of connection that survives even when memories don't. She studied his face, searching for some spark of recognition that stubbornly refused to come. What happened to me? Why can't I remember? You saved us all, Jake said simply. There was an attack by dark practitioners, people who use forbidden magic to steal memories and power. You stopped them, but it cost you most of your own memories in the process. Beth sat up slowly, testing the limits of her healing body. Most of my memories? So there are some left? Fragments. Your childhood. Some basic knowledge about our world. But everything from the past year. Jake's voice trailed off, and you could see him struggling with how much to tell her. Including falling in love with you? She said, understanding dawning. Including that, yes. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what she'd lost settling between them like a physical presence. Beth found herself studying Jake's hands where they rested on his knees. Strong hands with calluses that spoke of physical labor, though his clothes suggested he held some position of authority. Are you a king? She asked suddenly, the question emerging from some buried instinct. Jake's eyebrows rose in surprise. Yes, actually. How did you know that? Something about the way you carry yourself, and this room. She gestured at the opulent surroundings. It's fit for royalty. You were always perceptive, Jake murmured, and there was such fondness in his voice that Beth felt a strange flutter in her chest. Over the following days, Jake became her patient guide back to a world she'd forgotten. He explained about werewolves and pack hierarchies, about alphas and omegas, and the bonds that tied supernatural communities together. He told her about her own abilities, the power to read and manipulate memories that had made her both feared and desperately needed. What he didn't do was pressure her to remember their relationship. Instead, he courted her like they were meeting for the first time, bringing her flowers from the palace gardens and sharing stories about his childhood that made her laugh. He was unfailingly gentle, never pushing for more than she was comfortable giving, and gradually Beth began to understand why her forgotten self had fallen in love with him. Tell me about our first meeting, she said one afternoon, as they walked through the gardens together. Not the claiming ceremony. You mentioned that was complicated, but the first time you saw me. Jake was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant with memory. You were standing in the shadows during the ceremony, trying to make yourself invisible. You looked so sad, Beth, like you'd given up on the possibility of anyone ever wanting you. And you wanted me? I needed you, he corrected carefully. At first, anyway. I was suffering from a curse that was destroying my memories, and I'd heard rumors about an Omega with unusual abilities. I claimed you because I thought you could save me. Beth sat up slowly, turning to face him fully. That doesn't sound very romantic. It wasn't, Jake admitted with a rueful smile. I was arrogant and desperate and probably more than a little cruel in the beginning. I treated you like a tool rather than a person. So when did that change?
Jake's expression grew soft with remembered tenderness. The first time I saw you use your power to help someone instead of just surviving. There was a pack member whose son had been hurt, and you risked exposing yourself to give the child back memories of his father's love. You could have been killed for using forbidden magic, but you did it anyway because you couldn't stand to see him suffer. Something stirred in Beth's chest as he spoke, not quite memory, but an emotional echo of the person she'd been. I helped him? You saved him. And watching you do it, seeing the compassion and strength you tried so hard to hide, that's when I realized I didn't just need you anymore. I wanted you. All of you, not just your abilities. They resumed walking, and Beth found herself studying Jake with new eyes. The man he described, arrogant and cruel, seemed completely at odds with the patient, gentle person who'd been caring for her these past weeks. "You've changed too," she observed. "Loving you changed me," Jake said quietly. "You made me want to be worthy of the sacrifice you made to save us all." That night, Beth dreamed of fire and darkness, of a psychic battle that had torn her consciousness apart to save people she couldn't quite remember. She awoke with tears on her cheeks and the phantom sensation of someone calling her name. "Beth?" Jake was beside her instantly, though she hadn't made a sound. "What is it?" "I almost remember," she whispered, her voice thick with frustration. "There are pieces there, just out of reach. It's like trying to hold water in my hands." Jake sat on the edge of her bed, close enough to offer comfort, but not close enough to crowd her. "The memories might never fully return, Beth. The healers warned me that the kind of trauma you suffered could leave permanent gaps. Does that frighten you? That I might never remember loving you?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on their joined hands. "It terrifies me," he admitted finally, "but it also gives me hope." "How could it give you hope?" "Because if you can fall in love with me again, if you can choose to be with me, knowing what you know now about how we started, then it proves what we have is real, not just memory or circumstance or supernatural bonds, but genuine choice." Beth stared at him, struck by the profound truth in his words. "You're willing to start over completely? To court me like we've never met? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your heart again, even if it takes the rest of my life." The sincerity in his voice, the absolute devotion she could see in his golden eyes, made something crack open in Beth's chest. Not memory exactly, but recognition of a deeper truth. This man loved her with everything he had, and somehow, impossibly, she was beginning to love him back. "Jake," she said softly, reaching up to touch his cheek, "I may not remember falling in love with you the first time, but I can feel it happening again, right here, right now." His breath caught, and she saw hope blazing to life in his expression. "Beth, I want to try," she continued, her voice growing stronger with certainty. "I want to see where this leads, to give us a real chance built on who we are now rather than who we used to be." Jake's kiss was gentle and reverent, full of grateful wonder that she was choosing him again, despite everything she'd lost. When they broke apart, Beth felt something shift inside her, not the return of old memories, but the birth of new ones that belonged entirely to them. 3 months later, they held a new claiming ceremony. Unlike the first one, which Beth still couldn't fully remember, this celebration was joyful and voluntary. Pack members who had once feared her abilities now looked at her with respect and gratitude, understanding that her sacrifice had saved them all from a fate worse than death. Beth stood in the center of the ceremonial circle, no longer trying to hide in the shadows, but holding her head high with quiet confidence. She wore a dress of deep blue that complemented her eyes, and flowers from Jake's garden were woven into her hair. "Before our pack and before the moon above," Jake declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the gathered crowd, "I claim Beth Morrison as my mate, my queen, and my equal partner in all things. Not from necessity, but from love. Not from desperation, but from choice." "And I choose you," Beth replied, her voice clear and steady. "Not because of bonds or supernatural connections, but because of the man you've proven yourself to be. I choose you, Jake, with full knowledge of our complicated beginning and complete faith in our future." When their lips met, the pack erupted in cheers that echoed off the surrounding mountains. But Beth barely heard them, lost as she was in the perfect moment of choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and a future over a past she could barely remember.